Some mornings in this sport, the draw sheet lands like a piece of literature. You read two names beside each other, and something shifts, not immediately, not with fanfare, but in the way a baritone note holds beneath an orchestra before the full score arrives. Eala against Alexandra Oliynykova, Strasbourg, clay, the week before Roland Garros. That is not a first-round match. That is an argument the sport has been building toward for 2 years, finally arriving at its opening sentence. Think for a moment about what it takes to reach this point. Not just the tennis. The tennis is almost secondary to the story. Think about what it means to travel from the Philippines, from a country where tennis has always been beloved but never quite globally consequential at the professional level, and arrive in Strasbourg, France, on the red clay of the Alsace, and have your name listed as a genuine danger to a proven European clay court specialist. For the last 50 years, the women's game on clay in Europe has been a closed conversation, contested between players who grew up on this surface, who learned to slide before they learned algebra, who understand instinctively the physics of a ball kicking high off hard-true or crushed brick dust. Alexandra Eala has not merely knocked on that door. She has, in 2026, begun disassembling the hinges. We have seen this kind of disruption before, though rarely from this part of the world. When Novak Djokovic first arrived on the tour from Serbia in the mid-2000s, the establishment noticed not because he immediately won everything, but because the quality of his movement and his retrieval seemed to belong to a different dimension of physical preparation. He lost matches he should have won. He also won points nobody else on tour could manufacture. People who watched tennis for decades said the same thing. Quietly, usually in press rooms and broadcast vans, that this young man was not like the others, not yet fully formed, but different in ways that would eventually become catastrophic for his opponents. I have sat with that feeling several times in 35 years of watching this sport. I am sitting with a version of it now, watching the 2026 season of Alexandra Eala unfold. She is 20 years old. She turned professional with the full weight of an entire nation's expectation balanced on a frame that, physically speaking, is still developing. The easy narrative, the one written lazily in columns by people who watch tennis through statistics rather than through observation, would be to call her a prospect, to note the losses against top 10 players, to counsel patience. But those same people do not watch what happens between the scores. They do not notice the shift in body language when Eala stops chasing the point and starts constructing it. They did not see what I saw across the European spring swing this year, a player learning in real time to be dangerous. Before Strasbourg, we must account for what came before Strasbourg. Dubai, in February, was where the first whisper became audible. Indian Wells followed, where the draw could have been considerably kinder and was not, and yet Eala competed with ferocity that surprised players who had every reason to feel entitled to an easy afternoon. Miami brought more of the same. Then came Rome, the Italian Open, the Foro Italico, one of the most spiritually charged tennis venues on the circuit. On those courts, under those umbrella pines, with the history of Bougainvillas and Celis and Navratilova embedded in the very air, Eala put together the kind of clay court display that reminded older observers of something they had not seen from a Filipino player at that level: tactical ownership. She was not surviving. She was competing. The loss to Elena Rybakina in Rome was significant for reasons that had nothing to do with the defeat itself. Rybakina, at this stage of her career, is arguably the most complete serve and groundstroke combination in the women's game, a player whose flat, penetrating ball striking can dismantle clay court geometry in ways that even red clay specialists struggle to neutralize. To lose to Rybakina is not failure. To push Rybakina into the kind of physical discomfort that produces tight lines and second-guessing, that is something else entirely. Analysts who covered that match noted Eala's ability to redirect pace, her willingness to absorb deeper turns and find angle, and, perhaps most revealing, her composure when the score turned against her. She did not unravel. That is new. That matters enormously. Now the surface is the same, the stakes are high, and the opponent across the net is a player whose profile creates a very specific tactical problem. Alexandra Oliynykova is not a name that saturates the global tennis conversation, and that is partly because the women's game at the upper middle tier of the rankings, that complex, competitive band between 50 and 100 in the world, is not covered with the editorial resources it deserves. But inside the professional circuit, inside the locker rooms and practice schedules of the WTA, her name carries weight. She is ranked 68 in the world. She arrives in Strasbourg as a qualifier, which is itself a story worth lingering on. A player of caliber navigating qualifying rounds suggests either a dip in recent form or the kind of strategic scheduling that prioritizes peak readiness for the French Open. History tells us both explanations can coexist. Qualifiers at Strasbourg, almost by definition, are players motivated well beyond what their seeding might suggest. Her 3 WTA 125 clay titles from last season are not minor footnotes. The WTA 125 circuit, formerly known as the ITF 100K circuit, is where players go to build the technical and psychological architecture of clay court tennis at its most demanding, match after match on this surface, at that level, against opponents who are genuinely competing for tour cards and ranking points, does something to a player's game that no amount of practice can replicate. It installs a kind of baseline-to-baseline patience, a tolerance for attrition, an understanding that clay court tennis in Europe is frequently a game of structured suffering. You do not win these matches early. You win them by outlasting the opponent's ability to sustain concentration under monotony. That is Olynykova weapon. She grew up in a European clay court system, a phrase that sounds innocuous but contains within it several years of formative training that shapes technique at a molecular level, sliding into wide balls, generating topspin from defensive positions, constructing points through geometric angles rather than raw power. These are not skills that can be adequately practiced on hard courts and then transferred to clay in the weeks before Roland Garros. They are embedded. They are instinctive. When Oliynykova is engaged, when a rally is extended to the 15th and 16th shot, and the geometry of the court is being carved and recarved with each exchange, she is in a world she understands better than almost anyone in the draw. The critical question, the one that has been discussed at length in the tennis analytical community this spring, is whether the Alexandra Eala of 2026 can match that world, or, more precisely, whether she can impose her own world upon it. The answer requires examining what has changed in her game, technically and psychologically, over the past 12 months. Her forehand, which was always a weapon in theory but inconsistent in practice under pressure, has become more reliable at the apex of its swing path. The brushing contact has sharpened. The spin and depth combination, particularly when she is positioned slightly behind the baseline and under pressure, has improved in ways that suggest serious work with her coaching team on the specific mechanics of clay court forehand production, a ball that last season would have landed midcourt. The kind of gift that a baseline specialist like Oliynykova would devour is now landing 6 inches deeper with 2 extra kilometers per hour topspin. In clay court terms, those 6 inches are the difference between an opponent playing an offensive shot and an opponent playing a defensive one. Her serve placement has also evolved, on a surface where the first ball frequently sets the tone of the entire point. Because clay absorbs pace and turns the second shot into a genuine exchange rather than a reaction, Eala's ability to place her serve with variety has become a legitimate tactical tool. The kick serve to the backhand in the deuce court, forcing opponents wide and high on their least preferred wing, has appeared with increasing frequency. Against a baseline player who prefers to construct from rally pace, a kick serve at 170 kilometers per hour to high backhand is not merely an inconvenience. It is a structural disruption. But the dimension of her development that matters most, the one that all the forehand mechanics and serve placement statistics ultimately serve, is her composure in pressure moments. Tennis is, at its philosophical core, a game about decision-making under stress. Every point represents a fresh negotiation between what a player knows intellectually and what they can execute physically when their heart rate is elevated and their opponents are staring back across the net with particular focus of a player who will not give the point easily. Young players lose matches not because they lack the strokes. They lose because they lose the thread of the point, the internal narrative that connects preparation to execution. Eala, in 2026, has been repeatedly observed not losing that thread, even when facing break points, even when facing match points, in several of the tighter contests this spring. The psychological architecture has been reinforced. Against Oliynykova, that composure will be tested in a specific way. Clay court baseline exchanges at this level can last anywhere from 8 to 25 shots. Each shot in a long rally represents a decision: where to direct the ball, how much pace to take off or add, whether to change the geometry of the point by going cross-court or attempting it down the line. And those decisions must be made in approximately 800 milliseconds between receiving the incoming ball and striking it. What separates elite clay court players from good ones is not primarily athleticism. It is the quality of that 800 millisecond decision under pressure, repeated potentially 200 times across a 2-hour match. Oliynykova, across her 3 titles last season, demonstrated a strike rate in those moments that simply does not deteriorate in the second set. She does not get mentally tired, at least not obviously. She maintains her shot selection quality through fatigue. That is a significant technical capability. Eala's answer to this challenge, according to observers who have been tracking her development closely, is not to match Oliynykova rally for rally, which would be exactly the wrong tactical approach, ceding the game to the opponent's greatest strength. Her answer is pace variation and net approach. The ability to change the geometry of a long rally by suddenly driving a forehand down the line before the opponent has fully reset their position, or by approaching the net off a deep slice backhand, introducing a completely different set of spatial problems into a match that an opponent is prepared for as a baseline battle. Against clay court specialists who have spent their entire development learning to handle pace and topspin from the baseline, an unexpected and well-executed approach to the net is tactically catastrophic. It invalidates the entire system they were trained to deploy. The caveat, and it is an honest one, is that net play on clay requires a different kind of confidence than net play on hard courts or grass. The bounce is slower. The passing shot has more time. An opponent who can generate sharp angles from a low ball has a geometric advantage that fast courts do not offer her. For Eala's net approach game to function as a tactical weapon in Strasbourg, she must be selective, not approaching as a default strategy, but choosing precisely right ball, the ball that has already compromised the opponent's positioning, and then executing the volley or smash without the slight hesitation that on clay, at this level, is punished mercilessly. The head-to-head record between these two is, at this writing, limited. They are both young players still assembling their full body of work against each other. That absence of established history is itself significant. Oliynykova cannot arrive at the baseline with a mental dossier of past encounters that confirms what she knows about Eala's tendencies under pressure. Equally, Eala cannot rely on patterns she has established against a specific opponent. Both players are, in a meaningful sense, reading from an unwritten page. That cuts both ways. But in this particular match, given Eala's relative advantage in recent form momentum, it may cut slightly in the Philippine player's favor. Form confidence, when both players are operating partially from instinct, tends to be the residual factor. There is also the matter context. The Strasbourg Open is a genuine clay court warm-up event, not a satellite or a consolation bracket, but a properly seeded, properly managed WTA clay tournament 1 week before the French Open. The conditions and all sauce in late may carry their own character. The clay at Strasbourg tends to play slightly faster than Roland Garros. The balls stay lower, the rallies are marginally shorter. The advantage for flat hitters is proportionally greater than it would be under the slower conditions of Paris. That is quietly a contextual advantage for Eala, whose flat to moderate topspin forehand would be more effective in Strasbourg than it would be on the dead, heavy clay of court Philippe Chettier in the 3rd week of May. The conversation this match has generated, the Ukrainian social media response to Oliynikova's draw placement, the Filipino community's reaction to Eala's continued presence at European events, reflects something real about the way tennis is being consumed globally in the mid-2020s. The sport has always had its national and regional loyalties, but the digital infrastructure of the current era means that a first-round match in Strasbourg between two players ranked outside the top 30 generates the kind of online noise that 20 years ago was reserved for Grand Slam semifinals. Oliynykova supporters are not wrong to believe their player is capable of winning this match. She is absolutely capable of winning this match. The experience differential on clay, the technical foundation built through years in a European development system, these are real advantages, not imagined ones. But the tension in the conversation exists precisely because both communities understand that the outcome is genuinely uncertain. If Oliynykova were simply expected to win comfortably, there would be no tension. The tension is generated by the recognition, on both sides, that Eala has crossed some kind of threshold this season. The questions being asked of her are no longer developmental questions. They are competitive ones. And the stakes of that distinction, heading into the week before Roland Garros, are considerable. Step back from the court. Step back from the serve placement and the rally length and the surface speed in Alsace, and look at what this match represents in the wider arc of tennis history. The women's game has been, for the last decade, contested almost exclusively between players from Europe, Eastern Europe, and North America at its highest level. This is not a political observation. It is a structural one. The development pathways, the National Federation funding, the academies and coaching networks, the clay court exposure from childhood, all of these resources have, historically, concentrated talent in specific geographies. Players from outside those geographies have made the tour, have competed, have occasionally broken through. But the structural impediments remain real, and the exceptions prove the rule rather than dismantling it. Eala, if she continues on this trajectory, if the 2026 season represents a genuine inflection point rather than a fortunate run on favorable draws, would represent something that this sport has not quite seen before at this level from her region. Gabriela Sabatini carried South American clay court tennis into the consciousness of the global game in the late 1980s. Naomi Osaka changed the conversation about Japanese tennis entirely. What Eala might do, given the particular weight of expectation she carries and the specific depth of the Philippine tennis community's emotional investment in professional tennis, could be its own distinct chapter in the sport's post-open era story. That is not a prediction. Predicting tennis careers is a fool's errand. The sport has a long and uncomfortable history of magnificent prospects who plateaued, of late developers who seemed to arrive fully formed at 24, of players whose best tennis appeared briefly and then receded. Jennifer Capriati won her first professional match as a 13-year-old, and the world collectively held its breath. And the path from there to her eventual Grand Slam titles was neither straight nor comfortable. Martina Hingis was ranked world number 1 at 16 and had left professional tennis twice before she was 30. The career arc of a tennis player is drawn in pencil, not ink. What can be said with confidence is this: the Alexandra Eala who arrives in Strasbourg in 2026 is a different tennis player from the one who appeared in these European draws 12 months ago. The difference is not merely statistical. It is structural. The game has been rebuilt around a more aggressive tactical identity, less reactive, more imposing, more willing to dictate, and the mental conditioning to support that identity under pressure has been demonstrated in match after match this spring against opponents who were not there to give her easy passages. Alexandra Oliynykova will be the latest examination. She is a serious one. The clay, the experience, the aggressive baseline game honed across 3 titles last season, none of that is illusory. But serious examinations are precisely what reveal how far a player has genuinely come. Somewhere in Strasbourg this week, under the late spring sky of Alsace, 2 young women are preparing for a first-round match that carries the weight of something much larger than a first-round match. One brings the deep clay court literacy of a European development that stretches back decades. The other brings the emerging confidence of a player who has spent this season quietly proving that geography is not destiny. The clay will receive them both equally. It always does. What it gives back, point by point, rally by rally, in the long, unhurried conversation of clay court match, will depend entirely on what each of them is made of when the moment arrives. And ask the question. That is not sentiment. That is tennis. And after 35 years of watching this game at every level, in every country, on every surface, I can tell you with absolute certainty, there is nothing in sport quite like it.